I never thought I would find myself here, caught in a web of my own making. It all started on a lazy afternoon when the sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over my neighborhood. I was tending to my garden when I first saw him, Jake, the neighbor's son. He was back from college, and the boy I once knew had transformed into a man. His body was sculpted, muscles rippling beneath his skin, and I couldn't help but notice the way he moved with confidence. I glanced up from my roses as he walked past, and our eyes met for a brief moment. My heart raced, an unfamiliar sensation igniting within me. I was a married woman, yet there was something magnetic about him. I brushed the thought away, focusing on my mundane tasks, but the seed of temptation had been planted. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself stealing glances at Jake whenever I could. He would mow the lawn, his shirt clinging to his torso, and I would be helplessly drawn to the sight. My husband, Mark, was often busy with work, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my desires. The more I saw Jake, the more I craved his attention. One evening, as I watered the garden, I heard laughter from next door. I turned to find Jake and his friends hanging out in the backyard. Their carefree joy was intoxicating. I felt a rush of excitement as Jake caught my eye again, a playful smile tugging at his lips. I waved awkwardly, my cheeks flushing. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. I thought about how easy it would be to cross that line. The thrill of the forbidden was calling to me. I imagined what it would feel like to be in his arms, to lose myself in the heat of passion. But guilt washed over me. I loved Mark, didn't I? Yet the longing persisted, a fire that refused to die. A few days later, I found myself outside, pretending to tend to the flower bed while Jake worked on his car. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over everything. I could hear the soft sound of his music playing, and it enveloped me like a warm blanket. Jake glanced over at me, and our eyes locked. Time seemed to freeze. "Need any help?" he called out, his voice deep and inviting. I hesitated, my heart pounding. "No, I'm fine," I replied, but the tension lingered in the air. As the days passed, our interactions grew bolder. We exchanged smiles and brief conversations, each one laced with unspoken desire. I could feel the line between friendship and something more blurring, and I was both terrified and exhilarated. Then came the fateful invitation. Jake asked me to come over to watch a movie. My pulse raced at the thought of being alone with him. My mind screamed to decline, but my heart had other plans. I found myself saying yes, the thrill of the unknown pulling me in like a moth to a flame. As I walked over to his house that evening, my stomach fluttered with anticipation. I was stepping into a world that promised danger and excitement. What awaited me on the other side of that door? I couldn't help but wonder if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. And as I stood there, poised to knock, I felt a rush of adrenaline. I knew I should turn back, but a part of me craved the adventure. I took a deep breath, raised my hand, and knocked. The sound of Jake's voice, inviting me in, echoed in my mind as I stepped over the threshold of his home. The living room was dimly lit, casting soft shadows that danced along the walls. Jake was sprawled on the couch, a casual confidence radiating from him that made my heart race. "Glad you could make it," he said, a playful smile lighting up his face. I felt both nervous and exhilarated, the thrill of secrecy wrapping around us like a thick fog. "Thanks for inviting me," I replied, trying to sound casual, despite the butterflies swarming in my stomach. I took a seat on the edge of the couch, my body tense. We started the movie, but I hardly paid attention to the screen. I could feel Jake's presence beside me, the warmth of his body drawing me in. As the plot unfolded, I stole glances at him, trying to gauge his thoughts. His eyes flickered from the screen to me, a spark of mischief dancing in them. Halfway through the film, he shifted closer, his arm brushing against mine. A jolt of electricity shot through me, igniting a fire that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. I could feel his breath, warm and inviting, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. "Are you enjoying the movie?" he asked, his voice low, as if the question was merely a pretext to draw me closer. "Yeah, it's great," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't focus on anything else but the tension building between us. Jake leaned in, his lips inches from my ear. "Want to make it more interesting?" His words sent shivers down my spine. I looked at him, searching his eyes for any sign of seriousness. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to maintain a facade of innocence. But deep down, I knew exactly what he was suggesting. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned off the movie and suddenly, the room felt charged with unspoken desire. My heart raced as I faced him, the air thick with anticipation. I was terrified, yet I craved more than anything to close the gap between us. Jake reached out, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. His touch was electric, igniting a fire in my chest. "We could forget about the movie," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just you and me." In that moment, my mind raced with conflicting thoughts. I knew this was wrong. I was a married woman, and yet the thrill of the forbidden was intoxicating. My heart was pounding, each beat echoing the desire that had built up over the weeks. "Jake, I started, but he silenced me with a finger against my lips. "Just trust me," he murmured, his eyes locked onto mine. Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft at first, a gentle exploration of lips that quickly ignited into something much more passionate. I found myself melting into him, the world around us fading away. The kiss was everything I had been longing for, a release of pent-up desire that I didn't know I could feel. As our lips moved together, I felt the weight of my choices crashing down on me. I was betraying Mark, the man I had built a life with. But in that moment, I was lost in Jake's embrace, drowning in the warmth of his body. His hands found their way to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I could feel the heat radiating off him, a stark contrast to the cold reality of my life. The kiss deepened, and I surrendered to the moment, allowing my inhibitions to fade away. When we finally broke apart, I gasped for air, my heart racing. Jake's eyes sparkled with mischief and desire, and I could see that he was just as lost in this as I was. "Wow," he said, grinning as if he had just won a prize. "That was unexpected." I chuckled nervously, my mind racing with the implications of what we had just done. "We shouldn't have done that," I whispered, guilt creeping in. "Why not?" he asked, his tone playful yet challenging. "It felt right, didn't it?" I hesitated, torn between my guilt and the undeniable chemistry between us. "But I'm married," I said, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. "Doesn't mean you can't have a little fun," he replied, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Just think of it as a secret, our little adventure." His words stirred something deep within me, a thrill that I hadn't felt in years. I knew I was walking a dangerous path, but the allure of this new life was intoxicating. "I need to go," I said suddenly, my voice shaky. I stood up, trying to regain my composure. "Wait," Jake said, reaching for my hand. "Don't go yet. Let's just enjoy this moment." I hesitated, torn between my responsibilities and my desires. But the pull of his warmth was hard to resist. I sat back down, my resolve wavering. "Just a little longer," I whispered, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. As we resumed our intimacy, the reality of our situation loomed in the background like a storm cloud. The thrill of our secret was exhilarating, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. But for now, in this moment, I chose to embrace the adventure, to surrender to the desire that had taken hold of me. And as I leaned in for another kiss, I felt the thrill of the unknown wash over me, pulling me deeper into the web of temptation. If you're captivated by this tale of forbidden desires, don't forget to like and subscribe for more engaging and dramatic stories. What will happen next? The days that followed that fateful night were a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety. I found myself living in two worlds. The mundane routine of my life with Mark and the thrilling, secret escapade with Jake. Each moment spent with him was intoxicating, filled with stolen kisses and whispered promises that felt like a dream. But the reality of my situation loomed over me like a dark shadow, threatening to engulf me at any moment. Jake and I became adept at sneaking around. We would meet in the early hours of the morning or late at night when the world outside was asleep. Each encounter was a mix of exhilaration and guilt, a dance on the edge of a precipice. I knew I was risking everything, yet the thrill of our secret affair was addictive. One evening, as I prepared dinner for Mark, my heart raced at the thought of seeing Jake later. I chopped vegetables mechanically, my mind wandering to the last time we had met. The way he had held me, the passion that had ignited between us, it was everything I had been missing in my life. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" Mark's voice pulled me back to reality. I turned to see him entering the kitchen, a warm smile on his face. "It was fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just the usual." Mark leaned against the counter, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "I was thinking we could have a date night this weekend. Just the two of us," he suggested, his eyes twinkling with affection. My heart sank. I knew I couldn't let my affair with Jake interfere with my marriage, but the thought of spending the weekend with Mark felt suffocating. "That sounds great," I said, my voice lacking enthusiasm. As the evening wore on, guilt gnawed at me. I loved Mark, but the thrill of my affair was an escape I couldn't resist. I found myself counting down the hours until I could slip away to Jake's house again, where I could be someone else entirely. Later that night, after Mark had fallen asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed, my heart pounding. The moonlight cast a silvery glow across the room, guiding me as I tiptoed out of the house. Each step felt like a leap into the unknown, and I felt alive with adrenaline. When I arrived at Jake's house, I knocked softly, my heart racing in anticipation. He opened the door with a grin, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "You're just in time," he said, pulling me inside and shutting the door behind me. We resumed our passionate kisses, the world outside fading away as we lost ourselves in each other. I felt the weight of my worries lift, if only for a moment. We were wrapped up in our own little universe where nothing else mattered. But as we kissed, I heard a noise, a car pulling into the driveway. Panic surged through me. "Jake, I think someone's here," I whispered, my heart racing. He pulled back, his expression shifting from desire to alarm. "What do you mean?" Before I could respond, the front door swung open and in walked his mother. My heart dropped as I froze, caught in the act. There was no escape. "Jake, I thought I heard you," she said, her voice cheerful. But then her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Me, standing close to her son, breathless and disheveled. "Mom," Jake exclaimed, stepping in front of me as if to shield me from her gaze. I was just..." Clearly, she interrupted, her tone shifting to one of disbelief. "What is going on here?" I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air. This was the moment I had feared, the consequence of my reckless choices staring me in the face. "Mom, it's not what it looks like," Jake stammered, his voice tinged with panic. "Then what is it?" she shot back, her eyes narrowing. "Because it looks like you're having a secret rendezvous with a married woman." The weight of her words crashed over me, and I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that it was complicated, but the words wouldn't come. I could only stand there mortified. "Get out," his mother said sharply, her voice cold. "Both of you." "Mom, please," Jake pleaded, stepping forward. "Just let us explain." "No, I won't have this in my house." "You need to think about what you're doing, Jake. This isn't a game." Her voice was firm, filled with disappointment, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. I felt like a guilty child caught in a lie, and the reality of my actions crashed down on me. "Let's just talk about this," Jake urged, desperation creeping into his voice. But she wasn't having any of it. "I'm done talking. You both need to leave." As I stood there, paralyzed by embarrassment and guilt, I felt like my entire world was unraveling. I had crossed a line I could never uncross, and now the consequences were crashing down on me. "Jake, I'm so sorry," I whispered, my heart breaking for what we had lost. He looked at me, his expression a mix of anger and confusion. "Come on, let's go," he said, his voice low. We stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my flushed skin. The thrill of our secret affair had turned into a nightmare, and I felt the weight of my choices crushing me. "What now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I don't know," Jake replied, running a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. "My mom is going to tell your husband. This could ruin everything." Panic surged through me. "No, she can't. I can't let that happen. Then we need to figure this out. We can't just end it like this," he insisted, desperation in his eyes. But I knew that our situation was precarious. The thrill of our affair had transformed into a web of consequences that I could no longer ignore. I was on the brink of losing everything, and the fear of discovery loomed larger than ever. As I stood there, caught between my desires and the reality of my life, I felt a deep sense of dread settle in my chest. The thrill of the chase had become a dangerous game, and I was terrified of what lay ahead. The night had turned cold, a stark contrast to the warmth I had felt just moments before. My mind raced with panic as Jake and I stood outside his house, the weight of our situation crashing down on me. I had never thought it would come to this, yet here I was, staring into the abyss of my choices. Jake, we can't let this ruin everything, I said, my voice trembling. I can't let her tell Mark. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. What do you want to do? We can't just pretend this didn't happen. I felt a lump form in my throat. I don't know. I thought I could handle this, but I can't. I don't want to hurt anyone, least of all Mark. The truth hung heavy in the air between us. I loved my husband, but I was also drawn to Jake in a way I had never experienced before. It was a dangerous mix, and now it felt like it was all slipping through my fingers. I'll talk to my mom, Jake said, determination sparking in his eyes. I'll make her understand. Are you sure that will work? I asked, doubt creeping in. What if she tells Mark anyway? Then we deal with it together. I'm not going to let you go, he insisted, stepping closer to me. His resolve was both comforting and terrifying. I could feel the tension between us, the pull of our connection, but the stakes had never been higher. I can't keep hiding this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Let's just take it one step at a time, he replied, placing his hand on my shoulder. We'll figure it out. With a heavy heart, I nodded, knowing deep down that I was already in too deep. We parted ways that night, but the uncertainty lingered, wrapping around me like a shroud. I returned home, my mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I went through the motions of my daily life, but my mind was elsewhere, lost in thoughts of Jake and the potential fallout of our affair. Mark was still clueless, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I noticed how relaxed he looked, completely at ease. I felt a pang of guilt as I thought about Jake. I wanted to be honest with Mark, but the fear of losing everything held me back. How could I shatter the life we had built together? Hey, are you okay? Mark asked, breaking me from my thoughts. You seem distracted. I forced a smile, nodding. Yeah, just a lot on my mind. Work? He guessed, shifting slightly to face me. Something like that, I replied, my heart racing. As I watched him, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. How could I betray him? But I also felt the thrill of my secret life with Jake pulsing in my veins. I was torn between the two worlds, each one pulling me in opposite directions. The following day, I received a message from Jake. *, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the park? *. My stomach churned with dread as I read the text. I arrived at the park, the air crisp and cool, but my heart felt heavy like it was weighed down by lead. I spotted Jake sitting on a bench, his expression serious. What's going on? I asked, concern flooding my voice as I approached. I talked to my mom, he said, his tone grave. She's not backing down. She's still planning to tell your husband. My heart sank. What did she say? She's worried about you. She doesn't want to see you get hurt, he replied, frustration lacing his voice. But she also doesn't understand how much I care about you. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, the weight of my choices crashing down on me. What are we going to do? I whispered, my voice shaky. I don't know, Jake admitted, running a hand through his hair. I was hoping we could come up with a plan to stop her. What kind of plan? I asked, desperation creeping in. Maybe we could confront her together, explain how we feel, Jake suggested. If she sees how serious we are, maybe she'll reconsider. The idea made my stomach churn. Confronting his mother felt like a dangerous gamble, but I didn't see any other options. I don't know if that will work, I admitted, fear creeping in. Look, I don't want to lose you, he said, his eyes pleading. I'm willing to fight for us. Are you? His words struck a chord deep within me. I had never felt this kind of connection before, and the thought of losing it was unbearable. Yes, I want to fight for us, I replied, determination blooming in my chest. We spent the next hour brainstorming ways to approach his mother, but as the sun began to set, the reality of our situation loomed larger than ever. I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me, and I knew that whatever happened next could change everything. That evening, I returned home to find Mark waiting for me. He looked concerned, his brow furrowed. "Where have you been?" he asked, his tone laced with worry. "I just went for a walk," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Did something happen?" he pressed, studying my face. "No, everything's fine," I insisted, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt like I was unraveling. As Mark reached for my hand, I felt a pang of guilt wash over me. I was betraying him in ways he couldn't even imagine. The thought of him finding out made my heart race. "Let's just relax tonight," he suggested, pulling me closer. "I missed you." I nodded, trying to push thoughts of Jake aside. But the weight of my secret loomed over me, a constant reminder of the precarious balance I was trying to maintain. As I lay in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. The thrill of my affair had turned into a nightmare, and the consequences were closing in on me. I had to make a choice, and I knew that whatever I decided would change my life forever. The sun rose slowly on the day that would change everything. I could feel the weight of my decisions pressing heavily on my chest as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Today was the day Jake and I had agreed to confront his mother. The thought sent a wave of dread through me, but it also ignited a spark of hope. If we could convince her to stay silent, perhaps we could salvage what we had. As I got ready for the day, my mind raced with possibilities. I thought about Mark, how he deserved better than this tangled web of lies. Yet, the thought of giving up Jake and the passion we shared felt like cutting off a piece of my soul. The conflict tore at me, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to leap into the unknown. When I arrived at the park to meet Jake, I found him pacing nervously. His expression was a mix of determination and anxiety. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "I don't know," I admitted, my stomach churning. "What if this goes wrong?" "We have to try," he said, taking my hands in his. "I can't lose you, and I don't want to lose this." His grip was warm and reassuring, and for a moment I felt a flicker of courage. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." We made our way to his house, my heart racing with each step. I felt like a character in a suspenseful drama, each moment heightened by anxiety. When we arrived, I could see his mother in the living room, her back turned to us as she tidied up. Jake and I exchanged a glance, and I could see the resolve in his eyes. "Mom," he called out, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. She turned, surprise washing over her face. "Jake, what are you doing here? Can we talk?" he asked, stepping inside. I followed closely behind, feeling like an intruder in my own life. "Of course, but I have a lot to do," she replied, her tone curt. "This is important," he insisted. "We need to talk about what happened the other night." Her expression shifted, concern replacing the surprise. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, preparing to step in. Mrs. Thompson, I think we need to explain ourselves, I said, my voice shaking slightly. Her gaze flicked between us, suspicion brewing in her eyes. What is there to explain? She asked, crossing her arms. Jake took a step forward, his voice firm. I care about her, Mom. This isn't just a fling. I want you to understand that. The tension in the room thickened, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I know this is complicated, and I'm sorry for what happened, I said, trying to maintain my composure. But I didn't intend for things to escalate like this. Then what do you want me to say? She replied, her tone sharp. You're a married woman, and my son is not some toy for you to play with. I flinched at her words, each one cutting deeper than the last. I understand your concern, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. But I want to make things right. Please, don't tell my husband. It would ruin everything. Why should I protect you? She shot back, anger flashing in her eyes. You're the one putting my son in this position. I know I made a mistake, I pleaded, tears welling in my eyes. But I care about him. I don't want to hurt anyone, least of all you or Mark. There was a long silence as Jake's mother processed my words. I could see the conflict in her expression, the protective instinct battling against her disappointment. You think this is love? She finally said, her voice steady. You think it's worth the risk? I don't know, I admitted, my voice breaking. But I do know that I can't just walk away from Jake. I need to figure out what this is, and I need your help. Jake stepped forward, his eyes pleading. Mom, just give us a chance to make this right. We can figure this out together. She sighed heavily, her features softening slightly. You're both young and reckless. You have no idea how much this could hurt you. I understand that now, I said, my heart pounding. But I also know that I can't go back to pretending everything is fine when it isn't. I need to know if this is real. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. I won't tell your husband, but this is your last chance. You need to figure this out before you hurt anyone else. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with the gravity of her words. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my cheeks. But you need to be honest with yourself and with Mark, she added, her voice firm. If this is real, you owe it to him to be truthful. Don't drag this out. As we left her house, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me. I had been given a lifeline, but it came with a heavy price. The reality of my situation settled over me like a weight. I had to confront Mark, to face the truth of my actions. Are you okay? Jake asked, concern etched on his face. I don't know, I admitted. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads. You'll make the right choice, he said, taking my hand. I'll be here, no matter what. As I drove home, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sky. I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. I had to confront Mark, to choose between the life I had built and the passion that ignited my soul. When I walked through the door, Mark was sitting at the table, a look of concern on his face. Hey, you're back early. Everything okay? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. We need to talk, I finally said, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. Mark's expression shifted to one of concern. What's going on? I've been hiding something from you, I began, my heart racing. And it's time you know the truth. As I spoke, I felt the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders, but I also felt the crushing reality of my choices. I had to be honest, no matter how painful it would be. And as I faced Mark, I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to embrace it. If you've been captivated by this tale of forbidden desires, don't forget to like and subscribe for more engaging and dramatic stories. Thank you for joining me on this journey.